Ethan's days were a never-ending cycle of responsibilities. While other kids his age spent their afternoons playing outside or lounging in front of the TV, Ethan juggled tasks that seemed far too big for someone so young. After school, he hurried, home to prepare dinner, help Lily with her homework, which often meant doing it himself, and clean up their tiny apartment. On weekends, when most children looked forward to cartoons or sleepovers, Ethan worked tirelessly to earn extra money. He sold lemonade by the side of the road, mowed lawns for neighbors, and even helped stack shelves at the local grocery store whenever they needed an extra hand. Every penny he earned went toward groceries, diapers, or bills. There was no room for fun, no allowance for toys, and certainly no time for hobbies. His world revolved around one thing: making sure Lily had everything she needed. But despite how hard he worked, there were moments when Ethan felt like he was drowning. Sometimes, as he stood over the stove stirring a pot of soup or folding laundry late into the night, he wondered if anyone else understood what it was like to carry such a heavy burden. Did other kids have to grow up this fast? Did they know what it felt like to be both parent and sibling at the same time? The loneliness was almost unbearable. Ethan longed for friends, for someone who could understand him or at least try. But every time he thought about opening up, fear held him back. What if people judged him? What if they laughed at him just like the bullies did? So instead, he kept quiet, burying his feelings deep inside where no one could see them. To the outside world, Ethan appeared calm and collected, but inside, he was fighting battles no one else could see. Despite the challenges, Ethan refused to give up. He told himself over and over again that things would get better someday. For now, though, all he could do was focus on surviving each day. That meant staying organized and planning ahead. Every evening before bed, Ethan made a mental checklist of everything he needed to accomplish the next day. Wake up early, make breakfast, walk Lily to preschool, go to school, study during lunch break, return home, cook dinner, tuck Lily in, study some more, sleep if there was any energy left. One of the hardest parts of Ethan's life was watching other kids enjoy freedoms he could only dream of. At recess, he'd sit alone on a bench while his classmates played tag or swung on the monkey bars. He wanted to join them, to laugh and run around without a care in the world, but he couldn't. Not when he knew Lily was waiting for him at home. Not when he had so much work to do. The playground reminded him of everything he didn't have: a normal childhood, carefree afternoons, and friendships that weren't built on pity or obligation. Still, Ethan tried not to dwell on what he lacked. Instead, he focused on what he did have: Lily. She was the light in his otherwise dark world. Her giggles filled their small apartment with warmth, and her hugs made all the hardships feel worthwhile. Whenever Ethan felt overwhelmed, he'd look at her and remember why he kept pushing forward. For Lily, he whispered to himself during tough moments. Those two words became his mantra, his source of strength. But even Lily wasn't immune to the struggles they faced. One chilly winter morning, Ethan woke up to find her crying softly in her bed. When he asked what was wrong, she sniffled and said, "I miss Mommy and Daddy." Hearing those words broke Ethan's heart. He pulled her close and hugged her tightly, wishing he could take away her pain. "I know, sweetheart," he murmured. "I miss them too. But we've got each other, okay? We'll always have each other." That moment stayed with Ethan for weeks. It reminded him that he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for Lily's future. He vowed to make their lives better, no matter how difficult it might be. From that point on, he threw himself into his studies with renewed determination. If he could excel in school, maybe he could win scholarships or grants that would ease their financial burdens. Maybe he could create a brighter future for both of them. At night, when Lily was asleep and the house grew quiet, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his textbooks spread out before him. Under the dim light of a desk lamp, he pored over math problems, science diagrams, and history essays. Some nights, exhaustion weighed heavily on him, and his eyelids drooped shut as he read. But he forced himself to stay awake, reminding himself of the stakes. Education was his ticket out of this life, and he wasn't going to waste it. As the months passed, Ethan began to notice subtle changes within himself. He became more confident, not in the way he carried himself around others, but in the way he approached challenges. Problems that once seemed insurmountable now felt like puzzles waiting to be solved. He learned to budget their limited income more effectively, stretching every dollar as far as it could go. He taught himself new recipes using inexpensive ingredients, ensuring Lily always had nutritious meals. And slowly but surely he started believing in himself. Yet despite his growing resilience, Ethan still struggled with feelings of isolation. The bullies at school continued to mock him, calling him names and laughing at his patched-up clothes. They had no idea how much effort went into keeping Lily safe and happy. To them, Ethan was just an easy target, a kid who wouldn't fight back. But what they didn't realize was that Ethan's silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Every insult he endured was another lesson in patience. Every shove he ignored was another test of endurance. He was learning skills that would serve him well later in life, even if they came at a cost. One afternoon, as Ethan walked home from school, he found himself replaying the events of the day in his mind. Jake and his gang had cornered him again, taunting him about his worn-out sneakers and babyish habit of carrying snacks everywhere. This time, however, something inside Ethan shifted. As he listened to their cruel words, he realized they weren't just attacking him. They were attacking the very things that kept him strong. His patched-up jacket represented resourcefulness. His snacks symbolized love for Lily. Even his squeaky shoes were proof that he refused to let hardship stop him. For the first time, Ethan felt a spark of defiance ignite within him. These bullies didn't define him. Their opinions didn't matter. What mattered was the person he was becoming. A person who put others first, who worked tirelessly to provide for his family, and who refused to give up no matter how hard life got. With newfound clarity, Ethan quickened his pace, eager to return home to Lily. She was waiting for him, and she deserved nothing less than his best. When he finally reached their apartment, Lily greeted him with her usual enthusiasm. "Ethan," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around his legs. "Guess what I drew today?" She held up a picture of the two of them standing under a rainbow, holding hands. Ethan smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over him. No matter how tough things got, Lily's love reminded him why he kept going. Together, they were unstoppable, and that was all that mattered. In a small, quiet town where everyone seemed to know each other's secrets, there lived a boy named Ethan. At just 12 years old, he was already carrying burdens that most adults would struggle with. Every day after school, Ethan walked home alone along the dusty streets of his neighborhood. His clothes were always slightly too big for him, hand-me-downs from neighbors who took pity on his family, and his shoes had scuffed soles that squeaked with every step. To anyone watching, he looked like just another kid heading home, but they couldn't have been more wrong. Ethan wasn't thinking about video games or cartoons when he walked those streets. Instead, his mind was racing through lists of chores and responsibilities. Clutched tightly in his hands was a battered backpack filled not only with books but also diapers, formula, snacks, and sometimes even a change of clothes for his little sister, Lily. Lily was only 4 years old, and she depended entirely on Ethan, not because their parents were busy working, but because their parents weren't around anymore. 2 years earlier, tragedy had struck without warning. Ethan's parents died in a car accident, leaving behind 2 young children and an elderly grandmother who did her best to care for them. But Grandma worked long hours at a diner to pay the bills, which meant much of the responsibility fell on Ethan's young shoulders. From cooking meals to helping Lily get dressed in the morning, Ethan became both brother and parent to his little sister. The kids at school didn't know any of this, though. All they saw was a quiet boy who never fought, back when teased or shoved into lockers. They called him Scaredy Cat and laughed whenever he flinched under their taunts. Sometimes they'd snatch his lunchbox just to see if he'd react. But Ethan never did. He simply stood there, staring at the ground, waiting for it to be over. It wasn't fear that kept him silent. It was focus. Every insult he endured was another moment saved for Lily. Every tear he swallowed was another promise to protect her. One particular afternoon stands out in Ethan's memory. As usual, he was walking home from school, his head down and his thoughts far away. Suddenly, a group of boys appeared seemingly out of nowhere, blocking his path. They were older than him, taller and louder. Their leader, a boy named Jake, sneered as he stepped forward. "Hey, scaredy cat," Jake said, his voice dripping with mockery. "What's in your bag today, more baby food?" Ethan froze, clutching his backpack tighter. Inside were clean clothes for Lily, a bottle of juice, and a few crackers. If Jake opened it, everyone would laugh even harder. But before Ethan could move, Jake reached out and grabbed the strap of the backpack, yanking it off Ethan's shoulder. The contents spilled onto the ground. Packets of baby wipes, a half-empty box of cereal, and a tiny stuffed bear that Lily loved to cuddle with at night. The boys erupted into laughter, pointing and jeering as Ethan knelt down to gather his things. "Look, at this," one of them shouted, holding up the stuffed bear. "Does baby Ethan still sleep with his teddy bear too?" Ethan felt his cheeks burn with shame, but he refused to cry. Not here, not in front of them. He snatched the bear back and stuffed everything else into his backpack as quickly as he could. Then, without saying a word, he turned and ran toward home. Behind him, the boys' laughter followed, echoing cruelly in his ears. When Ethan finally reached his apartment building, he paused outside the door to catch his breath. He wiped his face with his sleeve, making sure no tears showed, before unlocking the door and stepping inside. The familiar scent of laundry detergent and crayons greeted him, along with the sound of Lily humming to herself in the living room. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, coloring pictures in a worn-out notebook. "Hi, Ethan," she chirped, when she saw him, her face lighting up with a toothy grin. "I drew you a picture." Ethan forced a smile as he set his backpack down and sat beside her. The picture was of the two of them holding hands under a bright yellow sun. It was simple, yet perfect. For a moment, all the weight on Ethan's shoulders seemed to lift. This was why he endured everything. The teasing, the loneliness, the endless responsibilities. For Lily. Because she deserved a happy childhood even if it meant sacrificing his own. As the evening wore on, Ethan busied himself with dinner preparations while Lily played nearby. He chopped vegetables carefully, trying not to let his hands shake. The events of the day replayed in his mind over and over again. Why did those boys hate him so much? What had he ever done to deserve such cruelty? These questions swirled in his head, but Ethan pushed them aside. There was no time for self-pity. He had to stay strong. For Lily. Later that night, as Lily slept peacefully in her bed, Ethan sat at the kitchen table under the dim glow of a single bulb. He pulled out his math textbook and began working on problems, determined to keep his grades up despite everything. Education was his ticket out of this life, he reminded himself. Someday he would go to college, find a good job, and give Lily the life she deserved. Until then, he would endure whatever came his way. And so Ethan continued his routine day after day. He woke up early to prepare breakfast, walked Lily to preschool, attended school himself, and then returned home to take care of everything else. The bullies may have thought they knew who he was, but they had no idea. They didn't see the late nights spent studying by candlelight, or the countless sacrifices made for the sake of a little girl who adored him. They didn't understand that. Ethan's silence wasn't weakness, it was strength. Little did they know their words and actions weren't breaking him. They were shaping him into someone extraordinary. Part 4, a glimmer of hope. The next few days passed in a blur for Ethan. He couldn't stop thinking about Mia's unexpected kindness, the way she'd approached him with that simple sandwich and an even simpler offer. "If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." Those words lingered in his mind, replaying over and over like a song he couldn't turn off. At first, Ethan dismissed it as a fleeting moment of pity, something people did when they felt sorry for him. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that Mia wasn't like everyone else. She didn't laugh at him or call him names. She just cared. Still, opening up wasn't easy for Ethan. Trust was a fragile thing, especially when life had taught him not to rely on others too much. For years, he'd shouldered his burdens alone, convinced that no one could truly understand what he was going through. Sharing his story meant exposing himself, his pain, his fears, his sacrifices, and that terrified him. What if Mia judged him? What if she decided he was too complicated, too broken to be worth her time? But then there were moments when doubt crept in. Maybe Mia genuinely wanted to help. Maybe having someone to lean on wouldn't make him weak. It might actually make him stronger. After all, how long could he keep carrying this weight by himself? One afternoon, after school let out, Ethan hesitated near the library where Mia often studied. He told himself he was just passing by, but deep down, he knew he was looking for her. Sure enough, she was sitting at a corner table, surrounded by books and notebooks. When she spotted him hovering nearby, she smiled softly and gestured for him to sit down. "Hey," she said, her voice warm and inviting. "I was hoping you'd come by." Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, unsure where to start. "Why?" he asked finally, his tone guarded. Mia shrugged. "Because I think you deserve a friend, and because I know what it's like to feel invisible." Her honesty caught him off guard. "You do?" She nodded, her gaze steady. "Yeah. My parents split up last year, and since then it's been hard to focus on anything. People don't always notice when you're struggling unless you tell them." For the first time, Ethan saw a reflection of his own pain in someone else's eyes. It made him feel less alone. Slowly, haltingly, he began to open up. He told her about Lily, about their parents' passing, and about the countless responsibilities that filled his days. He admitted how exhausting it was to juggle everything while pretending to be okay. Mia listened intently, nodding occasionally, but never interrupting. When he finished, she reached across the table and placed a hand on his arm. "You're amazing, Ethan," she said sincerely. "Most people wouldn't have the strength to handle half of what you've gone through." Her words hit him like a wave, washing away some of the self-doubt he'd carried for so long. For the first time, Ethan allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't failing. Maybe he was doing exactly what he needed to do, even if it didn't look perfect from the outside. Over the following weeks, Mia became a constant presence in Ethan's life. She introduced him to her parents, who ran a local community center dedicated to helping families in need. Through the center, Ethan discovered resources he hadn't known existed: free tutoring programs, counseling services, and even a scholarship fund for students overcoming adversity. For the first time, he realized he didn't have to carry the weight of the world alone. There were people willing to help, if only he let them. At first, Ethan resisted the idea of accepting support. Pride, or perhaps fear, kept him from reaching out. But Mia gently encouraged him, reminding him that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a step toward healing. Eventually, Ethan relented. He enrolled in the tutoring program to strengthen his weakest subjects and attended weekly counseling sessions to process his emotions. It wasn't easy. Talking about his struggles left him raw and vulnerable, but it also gave him clarity. He learned coping strategies, set boundaries with the bullies, and began dreaming again. Lily noticed the change in him almost immediately. "You seem happier lately," she remarked one evening as they sat together coloring pictures. "Did something good happen?" Ethan smiled, ruffling her hair affectionately. "Maybe I just needed a little help, Lil. That's all." Meow. The Part 5, Rising Above. Months turned into a year, and Ethan's hard work started paying off. His grades improved dramatically, thanks to the tutoring program and his relentless dedication. Teachers began noticing his progress, praising his resilience and determination. Even Jake and his gang seemed to lose interest in bullying him, though Ethan suspected it had less to do with them changing and more to do with how differently he carried himself now. Standing taller, speaking with confidence, and refusing to shrink under their taunts made him less of a target. One day, as Ethan flipped through the pages of a college brochure during lunch, Mia joined him at the table. "Thinking about your future?" she asked, raising an eyebrow playfully. He grinned sheepishly. "Yeah, there's this scholarship I want to apply for. It's for students who've overcome big challenges. If I win it, it could cover most of my tuition." "That's incredible," Mia exclaimed. You totally deserve it. Have you written your essay yet? Ethan shook his head. Not yet. I'm still figuring out what to say. Well, let me know if you need help brainstorming, she offered. You've got a pretty powerful story to tell. Inspired by her encouragement, Ethan spent the next several evenings drafting his application. He poured his heart into every word, describing his journey with unflinching honesty. He wrote about losing his parents, raising Lily, enduring ridicule, and finding strength in vulnerability. By the time he finished, tears blurred his vision, not out of sadness but out of pride. This was who he was, a fighter, a survivor, a brother determined to create a better life for his family. When the acceptance letter arrived months later, Ethan cried, for real this time. He held the envelope trembling in his hands, unable to believe what he was reading. Not only had he won the scholarship, but he'd also been named valedictorian of his middle school graduating class. It was a dream come true, one he'd barely dared to imagine. On graduation day, Ethan stood before his classmates, gripping the podium tightly as he prepared to deliver his speech. The gymnasium buzzed with chatter, but as soon as he cleared his throat, silence fell. For the first time, the same kids who had once mocked him were hanging on his every word. I used to think strength meant never showing weakness, he began, his voice steady despite the nerves swirling in his stomach. But I was wrong. True strength comes from facing your fears anyway, from admitting you need help, and asking for it. It comes from loving fiercely, working tirelessly, and refusing to give up, even when the odds are stacked against you. As he spoke, Ethan recounted snippets of his story, the loss of his parents, the sacrifices he'd made for Lily, and the lessons he'd learned along the way. He acknowledged the bullying not with bitterness but with understanding. You may have called me names and laughed at my clothes, he said, locking eyes with Jake. But you didn't break me. Instead, you taught me something valuable, that kindness costs nothing, yet it can change everything. By the end of his speech, the entire audience was on its feet, applauding thunderously. Some students wiped away tears, including Mia, who beamed with pride from the front row. Even Jake looked uncomfortable, shifting awkwardly in his seat as guilt flickered across his face. Years later, Ethan graduated top of his class from college, with Lily cheering proudly in the audience. She was 10 years old now, bright-eyed and full of dreams thanks to the foundation Ethan had built for her. Though scars from his childhood remained, they reminded him of how far he'd come, and of the resilience that defined him. As for the bullies, they faded into obscurity, mere shadows in the light of Ethan's triumph. Looking back, he realized they had unknowingly shaped him into the person he became, strong, compassionate, and unstoppable. And that was something no insult could ever take away. End. The bullying reached its breaking point one crisp autumn afternoon. Ethan had been walking home from school, his usual route taking him past the playground where kids gathered after classes ended. Today, however, he wasn't quick enough to avoid Jake and his gang. They spotted him before he could slip away unnoticed, cutting off his path near the swings. Well, well, Jake sneered as he stepped forward, flanked by two of his friends. If it isn't scaredy cat Ethan. His tone was mocking, laced with the kind of cruelty only preteens could muster when they felt untouchable in a group. The other boys laughed on cue, their voices sharp and jeering. Ethan froze, clutching, his backpack tightly against his chest. He'd learned over time not to engage, but something about today felt different, worse. Maybe it was the way Jake's eyes gleamed with malice, or maybe it was the growing weight of all those years of ridicule finally pressing down on him. Whatever it was, Ethan knew this encounter wouldn't end quietly. Jake reached out suddenly, grabbing the strap of Ethan's backpack and yanking it off his shoulder. It hit the ground with a thud, spilling its contents onto the dirt. Packets of baby wipes, juice boxes, a small container of crackers, and even Lily's favorite stuffed bear tumbled out. The boys erupted into laughter, pointing at each item, like it was the punchline to some cruel joke. "Look at this," one of them shouted, holding up the stuffed bear. "Does baby Ethan still sleep with his teddy bear too?" Another boy grabbed a juice box and shook it dramatically. "What's next, Ethan?" Are you going to drink this while we watch cartoons? Their words stung more than usual, cutting deeper than Ethan had anticipated. He knelt down quickly, scooping the items back into his bag as fast as he could. Each insult felt like a blow, but what hurt most wasn't the teasing. It was the realization that these boys would never understand. How could they? They didn't know about Lily waiting for him at home, about the diapers he carried because Grandma couldn't afford daycare, or about the late nights spent studying under dim light so he could give her a better future. As the laughter continued, something inside Ethan snapped. For years he'd swallowed his anger, burying it beneath layers of patience and self-control. But now, standing there surrounded by sneering faces, he couldn't hold it in anymore. "You think I'm weak?" Ethan shouted, surprising even himself. His voice trembled with emotion, but it was loud enough to silence the group momentarily. "You don't know what real strength is." The boys stared at him, caught off guard by his outburst. No one had ever seen Ethan raise his voice before. He used their shock to his advantage, snatching the stuffed bear from one of their hands and shoving everything else haphazardly into his backpack. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of them. With one last glare, he turned and ran, leaving the bullies behind. When Ethan got home, he slammed the door shut and leaned against it, breathing heavily. His heart pounded in his chest, and his mind raced with thoughts of what had just happened. He slid down to the floor, letting the backpack drop beside him. For a moment, he allowed himself to cry, silent tears streaming down his face as the weight of everything crashed over him. Lily, hearing the commotion, came running from the living room. "Ethan?" she asked softly, her big brown eyes filled with concern. "Are you okay?" Ethan wiped his face hastily, forcing a smile. "Yeah, Lil, I'm fine." But Lily wasn't convinced. She sat down next to him, wrapping her tiny arms around his neck. "Why are you sad?" Her innocence broke something open inside Ethan. He pulled her close, hugging her tightly. "I'm not sad," he whispered, though his voice cracked slightly. "I'm just tired." Lily didn't fully understand what he meant, but she nodded solemnly, as if she did. "It's okay, Ethan. You're my hero." Her words hit him like a wave, washing away some of the bitterness he'd been carrying. In that moment, Ethan realized how much he meant to Lily, not because of what he provided materially, but because of who he was to her. He was her protector, her guide, her family, and no matter how hard things got, he owed it to her to keep going. Later that night, as Ethan tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at him with sleepy eyes. "Will you read me a story?" she asked. He smiled and nodded, pulling out an old book from the shelf. As he read aloud, his voice steady and soothing, he found comfort in the routine. This was his purpose, to create moments of joy for Lily, no matter how small. By the time he finished the story, she was fast asleep, her chest rising and falling peacefully. Ethan lingered for a moment, watching her. Then he kissed her forehead gently and turned off the light. Back in the kitchen, he opened his backpack and began sorting through its contents. Everything seemed insignificant compared to the emotional toll of the day. The baby wipes, the snacks, the stuffed bear, but they were reminders of why he endured it all. Each item represented love, sacrifice, and responsibility. As he sat at the table staring at the bear, Ethan thought about the bullies again. Their laughter echoed faintly in his memory, but it no longer held the same power over him. He realized something important. Their opinions didn't define him. What mattered was how he chose to respond. He could let their words break him, or he could rise above them. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe things wouldn't always be this hard. Maybe someday people would see him for who he truly was. A boy doing everything he could to take care of his sister. A boy who refused to give up despite overwhelming odds. Until then, he would keep fighting. For Lily, for himself, and for the future he dreamed of. The next morning, Ethan woke up earlier than usual. He made breakfast for Lily, helped her get dressed, and walked her to preschool like always. But instead of heading straight to class afterward, he took a detour to the library. There, he found a quiet corner and pulled out his math textbook. Studying had always been his escape, a way to focus on something positive amidst chaos. Today, though, he approached it with renewed determination. "I'll show them," he muttered under his breath as he worked through equations. "Someday they'll see." By the time school started, Ethan had regained some of his composure. He walked into class with his head held a little higher, though no one noticed. The bullies weren't there yet. They rarely showed up on time, but Ethan knew their absence was temporary. When they returned, he resolved to handle them differently. Instead of shrinking away, he would stand firm. After all, he had nothing to be ashamed of. During lunch, Ethan sat alone as usual, eating the sandwich he'd packed earlier. As he ate, he glanced around the cafeteria, observing the cliques and groups that formed naturally among students. Some laughed and joked loudly. Others whispered secrets behind cupped hands. Ethan envied their ease, their ability to connect without fear of judgment. Yet he reminded himself that his life was different, and that difference gave him strength. Just then, a girl named Mia approached him hesitantly. She wasn't part of any particular group. She tended to keep to herself, much like Ethan. Today, however, she held out a sandwich wrapped in foil. "I heard what happened yesterday," she said softly. "I'm sorry." Ethan blinked in surprise. No one had ever apologized to him before, not for the bullying, not for anything. He hesitated, unsure how to respond. "Thanks," he mumbled, finally accepting the sandwich. Mia lingered for a moment, looking as though she wanted to say more. Finally, she added, "If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." Before Ethan could reply, she turned and walked away, leaving him stunned. For the first time, he felt a flicker of connection, a possibility that he wasn't completely alone. It was a small gesture, but it meant more than Mia could have known. As the day wore on, Ethan replayed their conversation in his mind. Could he trust her? Did it even matter? For now, he decided to focus on what he could control: his studies, his responsibilities, and his unwavering commitment to Lily. But deep down, he couldn't help wondering if maybe, just maybe, things were starting to change. Months turned into a year, and Ethan's life began to transform in ways he had only dreamed of. His hard work, resilience, and newfound support system started bearing fruit. The tutoring program helped him master subjects he once struggled with, while the counseling sessions gave him tools to manage stress and self-doubt. Teachers who had previously overlooked him now praised his determination and academic improvement. Even Jake and his gang seemed to back off, though Ethan wasn't sure if it was because they finally realized he wasn't an easy target anymore, or because their own lives took different directions. One crisp spring morning, as Ethan sat at the kitchen table reviewing college brochures, Mia joined him with 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate. "You've been working so hard lately," she said, sliding one mug toward him. "I thought you deserved a break." Ethan smiled gratefully, wrapping his hands around the warm cup. "Thanks, Mia, I needed this." She glanced at the stack of brochures spread out before him. "Any favorites yet?" He nodded, pointing to a glossy pamphlet featuring a sprawling campus surrounded by trees. "This one. They have a great engineering program, and there's a scholarship for students overcoming adversity. If I win it, I might actually be able to afford tuition." Mia's eyes lit up. "That's amazing, Ethan. You should totally apply. Your story is incredible. You're basically unstoppable." Her confidence in him meant more than she could have known. For years, Ethan had doubted whether he was good enough, smart enough, or strong enough to chase his dreams. But hearing Mia call him unstoppable made him believe, not just in himself, but in the possibility of a brighter future. With her encouragement, Ethan decided to take the leap. He spent weeks drafting his scholarship application essay, pouring every ounce of emotion and experience into it. Writing about his journey wasn't easy. It forced him to relive painful memories, from losing his parents to enduring relentless bullying. Yet as he typed each word, he felt lighter, as though releasing some of the weight he'd carried for so long. In the essay, Ethan wrote candidly about raising Lily, sacrificing his childhood, and finding strength in vulnerability. He described how those hardships shaped him into someone determined to create a better life, not just for himself but for his sister. He admitted his fears, his doubts, and his moments of weakness, but also his unwavering hope. By the time he finished, tears streamed down his face, blurring the screen. This wasn't just an essay, it was his heart on paper. When the acceptance letter arrived months later, Ethan stared at the envelope, trembling in his hands, unable to believe what he was holding. He tore it open carefully, his breath hitching as he scanned the words inside. Not only had he won the scholarship, covering most of his tuition, but he'd also been named valedictorian of his middle school graduating class. It was a dream come true, one he'd barely dared to imagine. The news spread quickly through the community. Neighbors congratulated him, teachers beamed with pride, and even Grandma hugged him tightly, whispering, "Your parents would be so proud of you, sweetheart." Mia celebrated by baking him a cake decorated with the words "Future Engineer" in bright blue icing. For the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to bask in the joy of accomplishment. Graduation day arrived, and the gymnasium buzzed with excitement. Students dressed in caps and gowns filed onto the stage, clutching diplomas and grinning ear to ear. Ethan stood backstage, gripping the edges of the podium nervously as he waited for his turn to speak. This was it, the culmination of everything he'd fought for. When his name was called, the crowd erupted into applause. Ethan stepped forward, his heart pounding as he adjusted the microphone. The sea of faces staring back at him included classmates, teachers, family members, and yes, even Jake and his gang. Some clapped politely, while others looked genuinely curious about what he would say. Taking a deep breath, Ethan began. "Strength isn't about never showing weakness," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves swirling in his stomach. "It's about facing your fears anyway. It's about admitting when you need help and asking for it. And most importantly, it's about loving fiercely, even when love comes with sacrifice." As he spoke, Ethan recounted snippets of his journey. Losing his parents, becoming both brother and parent to Lily, enduring ridicule, and finding unexpected allies like Mia. He acknowledged the bullying, not with bitterness, but with understanding. "You may have called me names and laughed at my clothes," he said, locking eyes briefly with Jake. "But you didn't break me. Instead, you taught me something valuable. That kindness costs nothing, yet it can change everything." By the end of his speech, the entire audience was on its feet, applauding thunderously. Some students wiped away tears, including Mia, who beamed with pride from the front row. Even Jake looked uncomfortable, shifting awkwardly in his seat as guilt flickered across his face. For the first time, Ethan saw cracks in the armor of arrogance the bullies wore. Maybe they hadn't understood the impact of their actions until now. Years passed, and Ethan's life continued to flourish. With the scholarship funding his education, he excelled in high school and eventually earned a spot at the university of his dreams. College wasn't easy. There were late nights spent studying, part-time jobs to juggle, and moments of doubt when he wondered if he was biting off more than he could chew. But every challenge reminded him of how far he'd come and how much he owed to Lily, who remained his greatest motivation. Lily, now 10 years old, grew into a bright and spirited girl thanks to the stable foundation Ethan had built for her. She loved art, often filling notebooks with colorful drawings inspired by their adventures together. On weekends, they still walked to the park, sharing snacks and laughter under the sun. Though their lives weren't perfect, they were happy. And that was all that mattered. Finally, graduation day arrived again, this time for college. As Ethan walked across the stage to receive his diploma, he spotted Lily cheering wildly in the audience, waving a handmade sign that read, "My hero." Behind her, Grandma dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, and Mia gave him a thumbs up, grinning from ear to ear. In that moment, Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the people who had supported him, for the challenges that had shaped him, and for the future that lay ahead. After graduation, Ethan landed a job at a prestigious engineering firm, using his skills to design sustainable solutions for communities in need. He rented a cozy apartment close to Lily and Grandma, ensuring they remained a central part of his life. On weekends, he volunteered at the same community center that had once helped him, mentoring kids who faced similar struggles. Seeing their eyes light up with hope reminded him of his own journey and reinforced his belief in the power of kindness and perseverance. As for the bullies, they faded into obscurity, mere shadows in the light of Ethan's triumph. Looking back, he realized they had unknowingly played a role in shaping him into the person he became. Strong, compassionate, and unstoppable. Their cruelty had tested him, but it hadn't defined him. Instead, it had fueled his determination to rise above. One evening, as Ethan tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at him with sleepy eyes. "Ethan?" she murmured softly. "Yeah, Lil? You're my hero," she said simply, snuggling deeper under the covers. Ethan smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "And you're mine, kiddo. Always." As he turned off the light and closed her bedroom door, Ethan felt a profound sense of peace. Life hadn't been easy, and it likely wouldn't always be smooth sailing. But he knew one thing for certain. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them with courage, love, and unwavering resilience. After all, he had already proven that even the heaviest burdens could be transformed into stepping stones toward greatness.